first of all, let's talk about the introduction that I really did not do a good job of. So there's CNET as well. Can you please do a better job of some of the highlights? Because I just, I rarely actually bring the bio of the person that I'm introducing, because I can usually sum it up in 2 or 3 sentences, but there's just so much here. So please.
Sure. So I have lived in New York for most of my life. I left to go to college and met someone here this evening who seemed to have been in the same area that I was at the same time. But in any case, I've had a long career basically in the world of content, is what I think of it now. I moved back to New York. I was a publisher for some years. In those days, you used to call it a publisher. Now you call it a content producer. And was involved in a variety of very traditional magazines, publications, marketing. Went back to school years after having gotten a degree in history, and got an MBA, because at that time it was really clear that if you had an MBA, you could make 3 times the money you were currently earning. And that proved to be the case. And then I met Esther Dyson, who, and Esther and I were business partners for 18 years, actually, and we built a business, a company called Adventure Holdings. We published a business-to-business report on technology called Release 1.0, and produced a conference called PC Forum, which was kind of before TED, was kind of the preeminent executive gathering.
And that was before Internet.com as well, right?
Yeah, yes, it was. It was
pre-Internet. Meckler copied you?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but yeah. But it was, it was a gathering of about 500 people every year. It really was the movers and shakers of the industry. The attendees were, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Mitch Kapor, and the people who went on to build great companies. And our job was to both provide great content and to showcase emerging technologies and companies. And I'm struck these days when one looks at, the pitch day at accelerators, very much sort of similar to what we did in those days, where we would have, content sessions, and then the afternoons would be filled with other entrepreneurs and VCs, and companies would get to, showcase their companies.
That was based in New York always?
No, we always did it, because we were based in New York, and it was in the winter. We always did it someplace warm, so that was our strategy. And generally in Arizona, a couple of times in California. And, so AOL, Steve Case showcased AOL there. ICQ, which was the original instant messaging program, launched at our conference. Lotus met IBM, Flickr met Yahoo, that kind of. So it was that type of event. It was great. It was a great conference. It was really fun. And then in addition, we were very interested in the early 90s in Eastern Europe, and had a conference business in that part of the world that was much more market-focused on emerging markets in Eastern Europe, and was also a terrific experience, really a labor of love. After the wall had come down, and there were actually all these incredible entrepreneurs and huge amount of technical talent, and an opportunity to kind of leapfrog and really bypass any legacy, because there was no legacy, and really put in some very modern technologies. And a lot of innovations come out of Eastern Europe, as we know. So it was a great time, and we had a publication as well, and did that work basically until September 11th, and then kind of abandoned that because it just got too hard to do a conference in Europe. But and then we decided that it was time to have a larger partner, and so Esther and I sold the company to CNET Networks in 2004. Both stayed long enough to do our earnout, and then we both left. And so
is that the exit story? Is that your favorite exit?
It's my most lucrative exit,
right.
So I suppose it's I make it my favorite. I don't know, yeah, I mean, it was very interesting, and for us it was very interesting because we had built a subscription-based business where people paid for content. And we didn't have advertising. We did at our events, we invited emerging companies to provide services to our attendees, which was essentially, I guess, a form of sponsorship, though we made them pay to attend as well, but it was an opportunity to showcase their wares. And we were interested, I mean, I was particularly interested in sort of having a business that was of the web and kind of born of the web, which CNET was, that was advertising based, and to see where that would go. And for me, certainly, it was a great learning experience, though when all was said and done, I decided not to stay, and there's lessons from that as well.
So was there a woman early in your life, or was there somebody early in your life that got you on, sort of directed in a business direction? Because, still we're struggling with the issue of women in business, but here was early 80s, and you were going straight for it.
My mom was a businesswoman, so I think that's part of it, certainly.
What did she do?
She was in sales, and
right.
she had a great balance because she worked for a photographic lab and sort of got to work with photographers and also do production and sell and to advertising agencies. And
right.
So I'm sure that influenced me in some way. I think that, and I also came of age at a time. Feminism was very important. I actually got a bachelor's degree in women's history, and at a time when that was a sort of changing period in terms of history and how history was taught and studied and researched, where it was as much about methodology as it was about the content, sort of the emergence of social history, which we take for granted now, but was not the way history had been told in the past,
right.
in which, where it was much more periodized by events that were led by women, rather than, the advent of birth control or the whatever it might be that actually very much changed the texture of society. So that was kind of an important early stage kind of involvement that I had. And then, as I said to someone here, the college I went to was also a very new experimental college, and it was a startup at the time, essentially. And so I think that the opportunity to see how to as students be part of creating what the institution became. I've recently reflected on that. It was actually very influential in terms of early on kind of the notion that you do and then you ask for forgiveness after, which is
right.
now, of course,
it's
the
kind of what you have
entrepreneurs.
going with the Catalyst right now.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
As a startup.
Right. And so I think that was just early on kind of my experience. And again, I've recently reflected on sort of, there's a pattern here, which, but so that was it. And then in the years since, I've spent the time mostly sitting on several boards, doing strategic and advisory work, working on a couple of projects that are sort of big meta stuff for foundation, and being active in Golden Seeds.
Right. So if you were going to name one or two business people that have forced you to reflect or have been kind of the most influential, or you look at it and say, hey, that's really somebody that's impressive, who would you name?
Well, look, I think, Marissa Mayer is a really interesting model these days for women. She embodies a lot. There's a lot of criticism, but here's someone who has both that tech background,
right,
and real training, and understands business. Didn't necessarily get all the credit at Google, but really built user experience in some way, and I think has been very influential in really establishing how critically important that is to the technology experience that we all have. I think there's a challenge there. Her predecessor, Carol Bartz, was a really important, similarly, someone who built Autodesk, a sort of under-recognized multi-billion-dollar company that is hugely important in terms of, virtually every building that exists in terms of film technology. And Autodesk is the CAD/CAM world, and she built that business very successfully. She will unfortunately probably be remembered as the failed CEO of Yahoo, and I think we could talk about that. I think that's something that is harder for women than it is for men.
Right.
You can screw up HP and you get to run something else when you're done. So I do think that that's still an issue. So I think she's a really important. I think there are a lot of startups that women led. It's the environment is different now.
Right.
Certainly, and I think business skills. I think part of why we're seeing a change is because business skills are increasingly important, and women may not have the.
How many people have a startup? Put your hand up if you have a startup.
Great.
How many people have a question for Daphne? Put your hand up if you have a question. Okay, well, everybody's going to have a question because I'm going to point to you. But you have a question.
I have lots of questions, and actually it was interesting to hear your introduction since I spent 18 years in publishing myself, also in New York. So maybe it's a good place to start if you're going to go be an entrepreneur. But one of the questions I would have is, as you're watching women entrepreneurs evolve, what do you think some of the biggest challenges are for them as they're moving into this space? Because they're still underrepresented in the startup space, and why is that? And what are some of the observations around what the extra challenges are for women entrepreneurs?
So I think, I had in my pocket somewhere, there's some stats that just came out recently, how much angel investing has increased for women, but the reality it's still 12% or something of angel investing is invested in women-led companies. And I think that...
So I think Paul Graham said 8.9, and then they're at 16 in his blog post reads.
Right.
So
I'm telling you, 16. It's really,
yeah.
So I think that there are I think there are specific challenges that women face. What I've seen being involved in Angel Group and investing in women-led companies is that women often, and certainly in the environment we're in now, tend to come to it perhaps a little bit later than a lot of guys do. So they might go and work for a company and then go, hey, I got a great idea, I'm going to go out and do this. But they first feel compelled to get a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge. That's great in terms of actually building a successful business. What's not great about it is that, and we've seen this at Golden Seeds repeatedly, is that they're coming to the game a little bit later. And by then, they have obligations and responsibilities. So one of my lines is, they're not 22 years old living in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and doing their laundry once a month. They have other obligations. And I think that makes it very challenging. So it's very hard for them to work for just equity. So I think that's a huge part of just a tactical thing that happens.
Can I then kind of take that a little bit further?
Yes.
And this is one of the things I often think about. That's true in terms of younger entrepreneurs and being able to work for the equity. Yes. And you're right. I think that we probably see a dip in entrepreneurship for anybody that's got a young family, has got their mortgage going, and all of those things. Either way. But what about the over 45 or over 50 women? So now they don't have those responsibilities anymore. They've got all this experience, and many of them are looking to start businesses.
Yes.
What kind of trend are you seeing for those types of entrepreneurs? And is the startup space supportive of that type of entrepreneur?
I think that there are certainly quite a few women, and they actually, to your point, yes, they've built careers, and they have a lot of domain expertise that they're now eager to take out into the marketplace and build businesses, and they see problems and they envision solutions for them. I think that another one of my lines is that when I came of age, you graduated from college, you took 6 months off, you went backpacking in Europe, and you got a job. Now you graduate from college and you do a startup. Okay. And it's really the way it goes. You see this in New York now. It's in epidemic proportion. We can talk about that too, whether that's a good thing or not. But so I think that and I do think that women come to it later. A lot of women do have domain expertise, and the environment certainly rewards younger people now in terms of their understanding. I think there's a little bit that's changing, and that there are now. Those women do have business experience, and there is kind of a little bit of a pivot that it's not just about technology. It's actually about knowing how to build businesses, and I do think that that's actually probably influencing why it went from 9 to 18%, which is sort of related to another trend, which is that not everybody can be Snapchat, and not everybody... Right, and so
although the 18%, to be clear, is just Y Combinator.
Yes, no, I understand.
Right,
I do understand.
And it's 8.9%, I think, for angel investing in women.
Right,
generally.
Right. That statistic presumably just changed to 12, but
Yeah, okay.
But the or whatever it is, it's still not significant, statistically significant enough. It's certainly not 50-50 or 25-75. So, but the issue was partly well, there's just a lot of, they're very interrelated and intertwined. So I think there is now a little bit of a shift to rewarding women who do have business experience. The technology's also changed in the last 3 years. I can tell you that 3 years ago, at a place like Golden Seeds, when we would see young women who came, or slightly older women who came with great business experience, but they couldn't find technical co-founders. It was like impossible. And so they were so disadvantaged. They were building not technology companies, they were building technology-enabled companies. And they could not find technical co-founders to do that. I think there's a little bit of a shift to that in that realm, and that's creating an opportunity for women who may not have that technical background and who are, that's again a separate issue, but are very underrepresented in terms of being engineers and having the computer science talent that's needed and the developer talent.
And why would they have trouble finding those technical co-founders?
Because it is ageist in that way, and because, you know,
It's also hard. I mean, it's hard to find a
it's hard
technical
for anybody to find it,
right.
but I think a lot of those, you know, there is a sort of the tale of how these companies are founded. It's, you know, two guys who meet in college, and one of them has a really great business idea, and the other is, you know, he took a computer science course with, and so they go out and they come. I mean, that story, you hear it over and over again. You hear it coming out of Stanford, you hear it coming out of Cornell, you hear it coming out of Yale.
Yeah.
It's not. So I think that part of it is just, you know, it's the communities you're in. So how are you going to find what you need if you're... And again, when the technology is very rewarded, that's fine. When the business starts to get rewarded, I'd like to think that represents an opportunity for it to pivot a little bit.
So you have 18 companies in the program?
the Imagination Catalyst,
And
yes.
how many are female founded?
We have 4 that are female founded.
Mhm.
So it's, which is interesting because OCAD, as I mentioned, our student body is 70%, our faculty are much more skewed towards, are much higher in women. So.
Women. Yeah.
So we're focused on this, on the theme of women in tech, or women founding. Is there anybody that has a question along that theme? You know, go ahead.
I do. Hi, I'm Judy Bloomstock from Bunny Ears, and I'm probably about your age, I'm just guessing from the general history that you've given. And ironically enough, sitting here kind of going, okay, what's next for Bunny Ears TV? We really do need some technical skills that we've been trying to scrape together.
What is Bunny Ears?
Sorry?
What is Bunny Ears?
It's a highly curated web TV station for young children.
Okay.
And actually a lot of the content is from Hungary. But be that as it may, so what I was going to ask was, when you do find that technical co-founder or person that you can partner with, whether it's paid or unpaid or what have you, do you have any hints for how to work with? Because there is sort of a generation gap almost. And do you have any experience with what works and what doesn't work? Trying to sort of get that to work a little bit better.
Right. Well, I think that one of the things that helps in those, what I get just empirically seen, is that if you then have if they have cohorts who are not necessarily you, I mean, you're sort of the business leader, but they have, you know, peers, their own peers, and cohorts within the company, that helps a lot. So that it doesn't, so there are examples where, you know, the leadership may be somewhat older and, again, perhaps more business focused or more, have very particular domain expertise. But the younger developers, if they're, you know, the person who's doing social media and the person who's doing, you know, are their peers, that you can create an ecosystem where it's not just defined by you, but it's kind of from the bottom up, as it were.
Right.
And that, I've seen that in instances that helps a lot.
So just sort of, you know, stand back and let them do their thing, and that's the culture of the company that you allow.
Yeah, that you, right. And which I actually think in general, there's stuff about that, I mean, to your question earlier, is sometimes perhaps an issue when older women who've been in, whether it's corporate settings or it's very traditional business settings, and are trying to figure out what kind of culture to create that will innovate. Okay, and you know, sometimes that's a challenge for those women as well, right? Who are in leadership positions and might have had most of their professional training in some other particular disciplined environment that's in a particular way. So, but certainly, if you're building something whose goal it is to be adaptive and open and iterative, then we have something to learn from how the younger population works and their work styles, right? Of course, on the other hand, then there's these videos that are out there that are so funny about, you know, how you get them to show up kind of like before 11, and you know how they're always used. They spent their whole childhood being rewarded all the time, so you have to tell them all the time that they're just,
Or you could
oh
be
my
like
God,
Melissa.
you're awesome, and oh my God, you're.
You could just be like Melissa at Yahoo and just say, okay, that's it. Everybody who's at the office has a job, and the people who are working
Yeah,
remotely
well, that's a
don't.
more complex discussion, and that has its, you know.
Okay, another female-oriented question, or along the
Yeah,
theme.
my mind's really around financing.
Sorry.
Kind of Vicky Saunders from GEO. So with Golden Seeds, you've been at it for a while. I think 7 years or a little more than a year.
The Golden Seeds have been around for nearly since 2005, I think it is. I've been involved since about 2007
Okay.
And they've deployed $58 million
in women-led.
in women-led companies.
So is there something different? Is there something different that you notice about the model that you guys use in terms of how you're financing? Is there a different approach? Is there something missing that needs to be shared more broadly, globally, around best practices around that?
Well, this is a slightly, bigger answer. But one of the things, so there's a kind of an interesting story around Golden Seeds. So a lot of the women who founded Golden Seeds came from financial services. Stephanie, the woman who founded it, had been at J.P. Morgan, a banker for many years. Did very well, but came to the glass ceiling and basically decided that the way to actually change the calculation was to support women-led companies and create the next generation of wealth by companies where women grew and built their own entities, and then would essentially pay forward in some way and create more companies in the future that would be led by women, rather than asking for permission to innovate within some other women, male, controlled entity. And that was its original premise. It's evolved over the years very much. The original people in Golden Seeds, many of them came from financial services. And so they brought a discipline to it that actually is one of the kind of unique characteristics of Golden Seeds. So a lot of angel groups, want to invest with Golden Seeds because it's known for doing such great due diligence. So whereas, a lot of angel groups are kind of like, well, looks good, let's try it and see what happens. And so that's been an important contribution, actually, that Golden Seeds has made to the, ACA would credit Golden Seeds a lot with creating some discipline around angel investing, which, to the extent that it does mitigate risk, I don't know. I mean, it's a little hard to measure in terms of outcomes, but has certainly been a contributor and been important. And from my own personal experience, actually, last year I was in Tunisia and I was in Egypt teaching the curriculum that Golden Seeds had developed with a cohort, and it was really interesting because you had something that was very structured, and there were angel groups in Cairo and in Tunis who were looking to invest in their countries, and they were very interested in the curriculum because it was giving structure to how to think about angel investing. And that its own challenges. I mean, you have to convince them that 90%, you can't own 90% of the company because then they're the entrepreneur is your employee. They're not an entrepreneur. You have to incentivize them. Of course, if you incentivize them, you have to give them equity, and then how do you value something that hasn't been built yet? So it was really, really interesting. But I think that some of that has actually contributed to opening angel investing and the idea of angel investing to people who would not otherwise have considered investing. So I think that's been an really important contribution that Golden Seeds has made to the sort of general angel ecosystem. I think that the issue of understanding that there are older, sometimes women who are starting companies, is something that, so there is sort of salary built in at the outset. It's not just equity in many of the cases, not in all cases, but an understanding that needs to be part of how the deal is structured. Perhaps sometimes some of those entities have done a better job because they do have a broader support network of having done a friends and family round, so they come to Golden Seeds having already achieved that. And I think just in general, part of the lines have gotten blurred. So what used to be an angel deal is now really a round. I mean, it's not, people expect you to, if you're going to go raise money, you don't have 250,000 users, right?
Yeah.
Well, come back when you have, all right, and it's not. So And that's been a challenge in some instances. So I think that's a meaningful way that it's contributed.
And how does Golden Seeds recruit new membership? It's the third largest investor network in the United States now, is it not?
Angel Group.
Angel Group,
if not
yeah.
the second, I think. So
Second or third?
I think so. I don't know. They're active in New York. The largest group is in New York. There's a very active group in Boston. There's an active group in the Valley now. And in Dallas, there's also a group that's very active. Recruiting members has really been a word of mouth. I mean, and, I think that you have, and women, and by the way, 20% of the group are men, otherwise known as the golden dudes, and, who see and understand that the metrics are out there, that companies in which there is diversity, which is ultimately the point, right? In which there is diversity, tend to be more successful companies. The stats are in. Kaufman Foundation, a whole lot of organizations have done this research, and the evidence is there, and it's clear that diverse companies do better.
Right.
Now, and by the way, in Golden Seeds, it's not that there has to be a woman in a leadership position who owns a meaningful equity stake. Might have been diluted by now, but a significant equity stake.
Are they doing deals in Canada?
There were a couple of deals that were done in Canada in the past. I'd say out of the portfolio, I know of one, there may be two. But, part of it, and that, of course, that has a different set of challenges.
So if you need like a great female-led company over the next 24 hours.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, you tell them to come to New York and incorporate in Delaware. No.
We have a lower tax rate now.
Yes, I know. I know.
Okay.
I know.
Well,
Believe me, I
as long as
know.
we're clear.
And all those grants. I mean, they're.
So one of the questions that okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just had a question just along the lines of what you were just talking about on the data. So the Startup Genome project has been going on in the States for a number of years. A lot of study of entrepreneurship in general and what are the success factors. Multi-founders more successful than single founders. Right amount of capital at different points in time.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got enough data to sort of looked at women founded or women predominantly in enterprises. Can you talk a bit about how you see that data being different or the same as in terms of outcomes and the kind of filters you apply when you look at an investment decision for one?
Right. So, without overgeneralizing, I think that one of the issues is often that it's that anthropological study that I want to conduct in the future. But I think that women are used to managing, whether it's families or groups of people. And so my experience is that a lot of these companies that come, they tend to be, you have to sort of convince them that they actually have a bigger business than they have. And, to the extent that we all know that business plans are, fantasy or projection of a reality that may or may not happen. Sometimes I've seen that some of these companies, the women-led companies, have a smaller view of what they're able to do than they should. All right? That if, in fact, they put the right team together and have the right resources, there's no reason why they can't grow a very large and very successful business. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, they tend to be revenue-driven. And so I think that actually one of the things, and this again, I think there's a convergence that's happening that hopefully will benefit women, is that in general, angel groups and investors are coming to understand that, again, not everything can be Snapchat. So you can build a $50 million business that gets acquired to the extent that the big companies out there are basically turning to startups to do their R&D, which is sort of the world we live in now, right? That these can become acquisition targets, where you can actually build something, whether it's, a content company that is looking for a vertical that it hasn't successfully penetrated, or it's a technology, some enabling technology that Mark Zuckerberg, every penny he paid for Instagram, it was worth it, okay, because he bought mobile, basically. That's what he bought, right? By buying Instagram in the form of photos, right? So again, if you build the right thing and you can then find the strategic for whom that adds value, I think that the convergence of that generally in the angel world, and as it applies to women, may present a new kind of opportunity. And I think, again, angel groups are looking at monetization and ROI opportunities that are in that smaller, whether they're 25 million or they're 200 million. Not all of them are 3 billion.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's helpful.
Go ahead, Amanda, is it?
Yeah. I was wondering, what is a great pitch to you? What are the elements? Do you have any tips? You or other angel investors? I've never done it, so. Business plan? Any details?
Well, I think detailed business plans, but again, I mean, this is my personal view. I mean, business plans are really important, and the reason they're important more than anything else is not because you got the numbers right, or because you understand what's at play, all right, and you're understanding a dynamic about, well, if you do this, then this impacts, this outcome. That it is a dynamic. I mean, a spreadsheet may be the most two-dimensional thing, but the inputs in it are ideally really, really dynamic. And I think that in terms of, as an angel investor, assessing that is the value that a business plan and modeling it offers, okay, with the understanding that that is going to change and I don't know of any startup where it doesn't change. But I like to say that it's part of it is it's an expression of people's business skill. It's an expression of their ability to focus, okay, because I also think that it's really important to not, say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, all right, but really because you want to know that somebody can prove a concept and then kind of, work from the circle out, as it were, whether it's in other verticals or it's whatever it might be that the business has to change. But to prove a core value, I think, is the point. I also think the ability to say it, you know that stuff, the 10-page blah, 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 put it in the appendix. I mean, there's all that stuff. But again, I think the exercise of that is the point. And the point is to be able to really articulate what your business does and its value proposition. And one of the things that's a real challenge in angel groups, which is different than institutional investors, where you're sort of targeting different kind of investors who probably have domain expertise in what you're trying to pitch, is that, angels are, it's a passion, all right? It's not, so people tend to relate to what they can understand and what they feel passionate about, which is the blessing and the curse, right, as it were. Because if they are passionate about it, then they're going to do everything they can to help you. Oh, I met this, you should talk to this, kind of be helpful to you in terms of growing your business at a very early stage. On the other hand, in angel groups, you have people, again, it tends to be sort of a projection of themselves in some way, or what they understand or what they feel. It's slightly less disciplined, perhaps, than other kinds of investing, arenas. And so that's why it becomes particularly important to really be able to articulate the value proposition so someone for whom it's not native can understand the value. And then, ideally, has the discipline to say, well, I may not be the target audience, but I get that this is happening. I get that, a young audience needs well-managed, curated television for a very young, and I can understand, what works, what doesn't work, what formats. And that, does that make sense? Does that answer?
Just coming back to the, sorry, I'll go ahead. Coming back to the incorporation in Delaware, you realize that if you invest here, we can get the government to match your investment.
I know that.
Did you hear about that?
Yes. Well, let's start a Golden Seeds in Toronto. That's the way to do it, right? Because, part of the challenge, honestly. I mean, a lot of the investments, it's not, the New York group may lead an investment that's in Colorado. It's not that all of it are New York-based companies. But I do think that it does matter to have champions and to really understand what the local factors are at play that would, I mean, when I was in Tunisia and Egypt, people say, oh, will you invest? It's like, no, because, I think it's why people invest in funds, for example, because they now have, they can have a surrogate who understands the landscape and what it takes to get those grants. What,
right.
That you